9 days until opening night of the Phoenix Suns season, and on today's episode of Locked On Suns, I'll answer 3 key questions for the final 2 preseason games and the final week of training camp. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendan Clean, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen. Welcome to a new week. Happy Monday. We are here every single day. That's right. So if you're finding us for the first time, or if you're coming back and you never quite hit that follow or subscribe button, go ahead and do that now. That's the best way to support the show, is just by listening and watching. And we need it. We need it. We need to get into the season. We need to get into this groove. YouTubers, if you're finding us there, again, hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell to make sure it notifies you every time we drop an episode. And drop me a comment with your biggest question heading into preseason game number 3 and this final week of training camp. I will give you mine, starting with number 1. How do the injuries to both of the Cams, Cam Payne and Cam Johnson, affect the Suns? So I put that one together actually prior to seeing the injury report today, where not only are those two out, but Dario Saric and Landry Shamet are both out. Dario due to personal reasons, Landry with what they're calling a left hip strain. Payne and Johnson both had finger sprains, and so they are obviously out already. We knew that. Johnson is the thumb, and Payne, I believe, is one of the middle fingers. So we'll assume those two guys have the most significant injuries until we know about what's going on with Shamet. But I think the question still stands, right? They both were practicing still, so in their regard, it shouldn't hurt things too badly, I think. They still can probably run drills. I don't know if they were practicing fully, but the media guys who were at Suns practice saw them both practicing, getting up shots, etc. They should be able to keep their conditioning. This is not something where it's like, a sprained ankle, or even what Josh Okogie has been going through, which is a hamstring, which just, you can't do much of anything full bore because you can't move, right? So I think this is okay in the grand scheme of things, but for Cam Johnson especially, it's obviously just a bummer. It's like, whether it's right in leading up to the playoffs the past 2 years, or now when he's supposed to be taking over the starting job, he always tends to have these small injuries that just come up at the worst time. So that's not great, but I don't think it'll hurt anything. Those two guys have been around for 2+ seasons each. I don't think it should hurt anything that badly. And they'll both step right back into their roles when they come back. Monty also talked about more minutes with Shamet at the 1 without Cameron Payne being in there, and the potential of some Okogie Shamet minutes. Okogie's actually questionable for this Denver game here on Monday night, so we could see that soon. Obviously, Shamet is out. So that was interesting. And then at the 4 spot with Johnson out, he didn't really commit to anything. He didn't say no to Dario Saric playing some 4, although now he's out. So I think the answer, especially with these 2 new injuries, is going to be a lot of people getting run. It's going to be similar to what we saw when they first went out in the Lakers game, where you saw a little bit of Landale, you saw some Dario at the 4, you saw some Ish Wainright at the 4, you saw a lot of Torrey Craig at the 4, and then at the 1 spot you saw Shamet, you saw Chris Paul, obviously, you saw Duane Washington. I think that's what it will be. But what are the ripple effects here? If our answer is a little bit of everything, how do they affect the Suns? A lot more people will get run, right? So the ripple effects of this are, Okogie seems likely to play in at least one of the preseason games. Since they haven't ruled him out, he's questionable for Denver's game, and there's still one more after that. And he did speak at practice about his optimism on playing one of these games, both of these games. You don't normally see guys be made available at practice if they're weeks from returning, so I think we're getting there. I wouldn't be surprised if he played against the Nuggets. At the 4 spot, I think the guy who's going to benefit the most is Ish Wainright. Because I think he has a real chance to beat out Torrey Craig for that rotation spot if he gets a chance. And especially with Dario out now, I think Wainright will play. Even if it's 10 to 15 minutes, I personally think you could make a reasonable case that aside from experience, Ish might be a player that I just value more highly than Craig, period. I know that might sound crazy. I don't think Ish is quite as athletic in the same ways, like explosiveness, quickness, mobility. Craig's going to be a little bit better. He can guard somebody like, let's say, what's a good example of that? Like 2 guards, like Bradley Beal. Like you could imagine Torrey Craig guarding Bradley Beal or James Harden. Ish is probably going to struggle more. They're not the same exact player, but Ish to me feels like a more consistent shooter if he gets reps and he gets open threes from the corner. And I think his strength while Jae Crowder's out could really be important. Duane Washington, I think another ripple effect is he's going to get a shot to play now. With both Payne and Shamet out, there's going to be no other choice. But I think it'll be, as much as I'm intrigued by his talent, it will be hard for him to earn a rotation spot, even though he's going to play. Because he freelances a lot on both ends. We got some extended glimpses of him against the Lakers on Wednesday last week. And offensively, it's like, yeah, he can run some pick and roll. He kind of has his bag there where he can get to his own shot. He can drop pass, bounce pass to the roller. He can get a lob game going, maybe start to kick out to shooters and whatnot as he gets comfortable. But it doesn't feel like he's doing it in the flow. It feels like he gets tunnel vision. All right, I'm running a pick and roll. And then it's like, all right, but are you running sets that Monty has drawn up, or are you just sort of telling your big man to set a screen up at the top of the key and go into work? And that's fine, but it's not somebody that a title team is going to want to entrust with the backup point guard spot if that's how he's going to continue to play. He was point switching defensively, which is literally what it sounds like. I'm behind the play. I'm getting lost. I'm going to bark at the teammate closest to me to take my man. Like, those are not things that high-level winning players can get away with. And so that, combined with the fact that Monty's history just shows us he's going to be incredibly hesitant on any backup point guard, right? Elie Okogie, Elfrid Payton, Aaron Holiday. We've seen all these guys who, for one reason or another, maybe not Payton, but the Suns had invested something in, and yet Monty did not commit to, right? And it's because he wants them to understand the pace, the decisions that need to be made within the offense before he hands them the keys. It might seem like a simple offense, and it is, but even something like, are we playing flow, feel offense coming out of a turnover or out of a long rebound or something? Or, are we going to run half-court sets, and then which half-court sets, and not having to have to micromanage as the coach? Those are all things he expects from his point guard, and Duane Washington right now does not feel like he has that stuff. So 2 preseason games to earn that, to get that drilled down, get a little bit of trust from Monty, but it's going to be an uphill battle for him to do that, and that probably means Payne still has a big role when he comes back. So maybe Shamet plays this 4th preseason game. Okogie gets a couple games to get some minutes, and that lineup starts to be what he wants to do, Monty, instead of Payne, or maybe as another look aside from Payne. But until then, that's a big change, and I'm just going to default to Payne gets his role back. So I think what it means is a lot of guys get an opportunity to prove themselves, to get some run that they wouldn't have otherwise. But I don't think we're, on the verge of a big rotation change yet. Question number 2 revolves around Jae Crowder and whether we see a trade or not. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel high stakes. We know how expensive things can be. We know how tough it is to find great people right now, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right folks for your team faster and for free. I've applied through LinkedIn Jobs to countless positions. The job of a freelance journalist, not always easy. Luckily found a full-time job a bit ago, but, it is not easy on either side. I've now been on the side where we're trying to hire people, and it can be hard. So, as a LinkedIn job poster, you add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. You can use simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with exactly the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you'd actually like to interview and hire. And the right team member can help you finish out the year strong. We know that the holidays can be busy in retail or logistics or these big industries where the holidays get crazy. The right person can not only help you get through that, but in any industry can help you get through this year and start off next year right. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. All one word to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So, question number 2 here in our 3 questions for the rest of Phoenix Suns training camp is, will a Jae Crowder trade come together? I'm not shocking anybody by dipping back into this snafu. Is that a fair word for it? New details from Mike Scotto at Hoops Hype. Suns are offering Jae Crowder and Dario Saric plus picks in the Bojan Bogdanovic deal. All right, so if you remember, the Suns were reportedly very in on Bojan Bogdanovic prior to when he got traded from Utah to Detroit. Detroit got him for not a lot. Seems like the complexity of what John Gambadoro has gone on to report about, and he reaffirmed that. He replied to my tweet where I tagged him and put out some info that he had already said, and then he doubled down on it and kind of said, oh, and this too. He said the Suns wanted to include Jared Vanderbilt, the really interesting sort of like alien big man defensive prospect that the Jazz just got for Gobert. And Gambo also reported that it was actually Landry Shamet who would have been in that trade, not Dario Saric. So a little bit of opposing viewpoints there between Scotto at Hoops Hype and Gambo here locally. We've also heard, and I haven't brought this up on the podcast, you probably most likely might have seen this, but the Mavericks are sort of out. Mark Stein, who's been a longtime ESPN guy and everything else, reported, not likely to happen. And that makes sense. They didn't have a lot to trade. They have a lot of guys like Crowder already. That's not really what they need. So that made sense to me. I never expected it to really happen. The Suns trading one of their starters to the team that just punched them out of the playoffs would have been a little crazy. So that all makes sense. Where are we around the NBA? Because I think to answer the question of will a Jae Crowder trade materialize, you got to be honest with yourself about the league right now. And not that Crowder's not desirable, but there's just not a lot of trade discussion right now, period. The Lakers and Pacers were reportedly pretty close on a Buddy Hield and Miles Turner deal that's been lingering all summer, but they didn't do it. You see some reports locally in Indiana that Miles Turner might still be moved somewhere before opening night, but I'll believe that when I see it. We've been hearing that for so long, and that's not something where I think it would make sense for the Suns anyway. But obviously you can always sort of keep your ear to the ground and, let's make that a 3-team trade. Or like we're talking about with Utah so much, if something changes hands, can we get in on that and get something we want if it's bad teams trading different players back and forth? Like, there's ways to involve yourself, and more movement is going to be better if you're wanting to make a trade, whether you're in all those talks or not. And then some of the players we had heard all summer, or at least for a while now, had been available. They don't feel like they are, right? I mean, John Collins, who people have gotten a little adventurous and tried to say, well, could the Crowder trade become part of a John Collins trade in Atlanta? On this podcast and in the rumor mill around the league, there's this buzz around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He talked about at Media Day that they're not going to be losing for very much longer. I don't know if he's right on that, especially with the draft upcoming being so great. Oklahoma City might still want to lose, whether Shai is on board with that or not. And then even the Jazz players, right? Like, you're not hearing a lot. Since Bogdanovic went away, you're not hearing stuff on Jordan Clarkson, Mike Conley, Malik Beasley, Lowry, Markkanen, some of these players that they've either gotten in their big trades for Mitchell and Gobert or who they already had on their roster that they might have wanted to shop anyway. These players are not being burbled about at all. There's no reporting around those guys. I don't know if that means that they're not going to be moved or just there's not a lot of noise. I would expect the Suns to be on the phone with Utah again because there's so many players there, but it feels like if that was happening, we also would have heard about it. So, I'm leaning toward no. I'm leaning toward no Jae Crowder trade before the regular season begins. That's 9 days. I know the Suns move in silence, so it's not even so much that there's been a lack of noise or reporting that's making me say that, but it's more so looking around the league, and unless it is the Jazz, I think that one feels incredibly possible. Markkanen, Clarkson, Beasley, I think any of those three guys would help the Suns quite a bit, to be honest with you. Unless it's that, I just don't think there's a lot of teams out there that want to mess with what they have so close to the season. I thought if the Suns wanted to get a deal done before the regular season, they would have done a Crowder trade right away, right? He announced over the weekend prior to Media Day, 2 weeks ago now, that he did not want to be around anymore. And I thought, okay, the trade's going to come very soon so that whatever team is trading for Crowder, whatever the Suns are getting back, all those new players who have changed teams have all of camp to get ingratiated. But now that time is gone. It's only about a week. So I tend to feel like now we're waiting in the long game where teams are going to want to see what they have. They're going to want to wait on injuries and then maybe revisit a trade down the line. That's not what a lot of people want to hear. That's just my read on it right now. So what does that mean? I think the current rotation is still going to be able to win a ton of regular season games. I think I'm hitting over on the 52.5 win over-under for wins. But they are thin right now. And the longer they go with Crowder, any absence from especially McHale and Cam is going to hurt them because they just don't have any more two-way players at the forward spots. Ish Wainright, not a starting caliber two-way player by any means. Maybe he becomes that. I like I said, I'm excited by him. Torrey Craig, not a two-way. He's a defensive player, and that's about it. Dario Saric doesn't look really ready right now, or they don't seem to trust him. Like, you got to be worried about that. And so that's the other thing. You're good for right now. I think the rotation as is fine. But any injury starts to push you into an even more desperate place, and then you lose leverage even more. You also want as much time as possible to get the new additions comfortable, right? Like, I don't think a trade's going to linger all the way till the deadline because I think at some point Crowder's going to get antsy and, teams are going to just act. We see trades before the deadline all the time. There's always a few every year. The Suns are going to be one of them, it seems like. But even if it's December, you're just taking valuable regular season game time out of the equation that you could be using to integrate a new player, right? Let's say it is Jordan Clarkson. Well, that's a player who has the ball in his hands a lot. I was just talking about with Duane Washington, the trust level that Monty has to build up with his point guards. Clarkson would be a guy off the bench who would be controlling everything offensively. That's not something that you just want to plug into, the rotation when the playoffs are just a couple months away. You want to do that as soon as you can. So I think it will still be, I would say, prior to the first of the year, but I don't know if it's going to be tomorrow. And I don't think if you look around the league, it would be reasonable to project that there's a big, nice trade sitting out there. And if there was, the Suns would have done it already. Question number 3 actually revolves around the starting lineup as well. Another plot line throughout the preseason has been the Suns offense. How's it going to change? Will it change? We'll address that next. First, today's show, guys, also brought to you by BetOnline, your number one source for sports betting info all year long, especially during football season. Find the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering info with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. Over-unders, win totals, pro basketball. Okay? They got them. 31 of them, because every single team has a line at BetOnline, as does a bet you can make for which team's going to win the most games, which if you had bet the Suns last year, you really would have cashed in on. The Suns are at 52.5, as I mentioned in that last segment. I'm hitting the over. That's, I believe, 1 or 2 wins higher than what their over-under was last year, and they blew past that. They were the best clutch team in the NBA last year. Like, you know the deal. Put some money down. Make the season that much more exciting as the Suns hit the road again for the season. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events, including football, but not limited to. Basketball is here as well. Head to betonline.net or use their mobile app to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Alrighty, so question number 3 here as we preview the rest of Suns training camp. Will the Suns actually commit to changing their offense? To get specific about what that means, Deandre Ayton's opportunities in this capacity on the short roll, they come on the short roll, they come inside, they're at the expense of Booker and Paul. Okay? They're mostly going to be pick and roll, dribble handoff types of things where for 2 years those opportunities have come and they've resulted in they've been generating shots for Booker and Paul. That's what's led the Suns to be a top 5 offense the past 2 years. Mikal's opportunities, if we're changing things up a little bit offensively, it's a more traditional secondary scoring type of role, right? It's attacking closeouts, handling the ball in transition, running a second side pick and roll after the ball has reversed, taking and making more threes, even ones that might be on the move or a little bit more contested. He's not just going to be taking, wide open catch and shoot threes anymore, but he might be doing a little bit more. Between the two of those things, Mikal's is the most repeatable, right? There's examples throughout NBA history of Mikal types developing alongside other great offensive players and then taking the reins of the offense when their time arises, right? There's a reason that in the Spurs dynasty, it was Kawhi who sprouted up as Duncan and Ginobili got older, and it became sort of the Parker-Kawhi show. Right? There's a reason James Worthy stepped up as Kareem aged in the Lakers dynasty. There's a reason last year that Andrew Wiggins energized the Warriors, brought a little bit more, became an all-star starter. The elite role player who gradually takes on more offense and offensive load and creation ability is easier to develop. That's the reason. They're easier to develop because they already have a fit in the offense, right? And they can just do more with it. Where and how they get the ball doesn't have to change. Mikal's path to doing more on offense and mixing up the Suns' offense is obvious. We've seen it. I would even throw Paul George in there with the Pacers teams. When he was first aging into their core, it was Danny Granger, it was David West, it was Darren Collison. And then as Paul George got better, he started to take on more and more of the creation ability. And I think the obvious thing that I'm not saying yet is those players already dribble the ball. They already have the ball in their hands. Big men, they're being set up. So inherently, any big man who's going to start to take more shots, the person setting them up is now going to be taking less shots. And that's why Ayton's growth requires more commitment. And why, to me, it comes back to Monty, because Booker and especially Paul already look for Ayton in the pick and roll. You can trust they're going to make the right play in those spots 99% of the time, right? So saying, find Ayton more, it's like they do that. He's already, we don't need to talk about the guy like he's only scoring 12 points per game, like he's DeAndre Jordan or something, right? That's not what's happening here. He's already developed and not hit his ceiling of what he can do with some of those situations. I think, some of the Amare Stoudemire one dribble into a dunk, drawing more fouls. There's these tiny ways, but he's doing a lot with what he's already had. It's up to Monty, though, to enforce more commitment to Ayton and build lineups too where it works. Something I've been harping on all month as I've been previewing the season is Ayton never plays with bench units. He plays with Chris Paul and Devin Booker exclusively, and it's not to say you don't want him to play with those guys, but put lineups on the floor where he actually can take up some of those opportunities, and it doesn't make people uncomfortable, and it doesn't take away from others quite as much. But from an X's and O's standpoint, don't forget that at Media Day, Monty wasn't talking about more post-ups or anything really out of the ordinary. Monty sees Ayton's growth as coming in areas where he already gets the ball also, just like Mikal, mainly looking to score rather than distribute at the elbow, extending his range to three so that he can pick and pop more often. Those are the things that Monty talked about. He didn't say we're going to bang the ball into the post, or we're going to run high-low stuff, or we're going to have Ayton, playing like he's Karl Anthony Towns and chucking threes off the bounce. Like, these are not things that Ayton's ready to do. These are not things that would be smart to ask him to do. But being more of a scorer in the situations where he's already comfortable, that's how Monty is trying to make it a little bit easier and more repeatable like it is with Mikal. But again, Mikal's opportunities aren't taking away from Booker or Paul. It's really about his own aggressiveness, right? Whereas Ayton, it's about changing the mindset of everybody on the floor. And so the matchup with Jokic on Monday night here should be a really good test for Ayton. He always gets up for that matchup. He's always played well. And that defensively, we've seen Ayton really be able to take advantage and get to the basket because Jokic plays so far out on defense and he's not a great athlete to recover and contest at the basket and all that stuff. And for Bridges, I think it will just be important to see him stay committed himself. Get all the way to the rim, shoot more overall, take some of those, more iffy threes and just be confident in himself. But I think the Suns will stay committed with Mikal. I just think there's no reason not to. With Ayton, I'm a little bit less optimistic. I'm not going to lie. I'm not saying that about the rest of the season. I'm not saying that we won't see any more development or split toward Ayton by game 82. But I think if we're looking at it Monday, Wednesday, and then next Wednesday, game one, I think it's going to be a long process and not an easy one. It might take, Chris Paul getting hurt for a while or something like that for it to really pop the way that it maybe needs to. Like last year with Wiggins, right? There was a situation where Klay wasn't there, so Wiggins became basically the second scorer. That's something that you can look to. With big men, I think it can be a little bit different, but you've seen that with times where Chris Paul got hurt and Blake Griffin got a lot better. These things happen, but they don't just materialize. They have to be devoted to, and it's just a very different way than we've seen Ayton really be used. So, TBD, and not a lot of optimism. That'll do it for today's show, guys. A big thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Monday. Now, go make Locked On NBA your second listen to catch up on everything else going on around the league.